Hi, readers. This is lesson 1 from getting back into independent reading and building a vibrant reading life. I want to ask you a really huge question for our warm-up. So maybe you want to take out a piece of paper and jot this down, or maybe you're going to open a Google Doc on your computer. This is our do now question, but don't submit it just after you write something down. You're going to want to hold on to this one and keep adding to it as the lesson goes on today. So here it is. Why does it matter that people are good readers? Why does it matter that you are a good reader? Think about it. Imagine what your life would be like if you couldn't read. Imagine what your family life would be like if your family couldn't read. What would you be able to do, not be able to do because of reading? Maybe make a list, maybe write a blurb, maybe write an experience you've had with this. Take a second to really think and write. Once you've done that, start to listen to these other options. And maybe you want to add on to your list. Here are some things that people might say. It matters that people are good readers because they need to be able to read things like traffic signs, directions, to get around. A place like Brooklyn or New York City, that would be pretty tough if you couldn't read at all. You need to be able to pay your bills. If you couldn't read, that'd be pretty bad, right? You might get into some big trouble there. Important legal documents, a lot of readers say said taxes. To learn something or anything new. For instance, maybe it's a game, a recipe, putting together a household appliance. If you couldn't read, you wouldn't be able to do some of these everyday things. So wait a second. Does that mean that this is what reading is? That these are the reasons why we should read? I thought that reading was different. For instance, we come to ELA every day expecting to read and read and read, to get better at reading and better and better and be able to read harder and bigger books. But if reading is this, then what are we doing in ELA anyway? So today I want to teach you that readers get stronger when they know why they read. And then they make plans for their reading that have to do with exactly that. Why they read and why it's important to them. So I want to walk you through how I decide why I read and then make a plan that reflects it. And as I do this, you might want to start making your own plan. And you might also want to add on to or revise the list you might have just made for your warm-up. So why does reading matter to me? Let me think. Maybe I could think back to when I first started reading. Maybe I could think about the times where I felt like it was important. Okay, let me go back, way back to like kindergarten, first grade. I'm trying to think like important moments in my reading life. I remember being able to use a dictionary for the first time. And even though I didn't know what a word meant in my book, this was I think in first grade, I was reading Cam Jansen. You might have read that series too. And I couldn't figure out the word in a book. So I grabbed a dictionary. And because I could read some words, I remember being able to figure out the definition from the words I already knew and could read to figuring out the definition for an even harder word. I remember as a first grader feeling so empowered by this. I was thinking, wow, if my small amount of words and my ability to read can get me this far, imagine what else it can do for me. Maybe you want to think back to your first memories as a reader or times you felt like reading was super powerful for you. Or maybe even think back to moments where you couldn't read something and it felt really challenging, even devastating. I remember times I've taken state tests or times I've taken giant tests like the SATs that determine where you go to college. And I remember reading and not knowing certain words and feeling just completely lost and sad. So reading definitely helps me to learn more stuff, but also accomplish things like learning more words or getting better at my reading and reading even more challenging books or going to college. So it's helped me to achieve things in my life. What about the everyday reading I do? What about the everyday reading you do? What do you read every day? I know I read a lot every day, but let me just kind of walk through the last few days of my life. What have I read? I read receipts from shopping. I remember thinking I got charged too much, so I had to reread the receipt. I was reading numbers. Have you thought about that one? Yeah, reading numbers is also reading. I remember reading a menu over the weekend when I was ordering food. I remember I'm always reading directions because I'm always lost. Definitely don't know what I would do if I couldn't read directions. Oh my gosh. So right now, maybe you want to start jotting down some times where you felt reading was super, super important and big in your life, or maybe times where writing felt really, really essential, like an everyday thing that you don't know what you would do if you couldn't do it. You don't know what your life would look like. So take a second to think and maybe even jot and add on, why does reading matter to me? I'll start writing some of mine too. I already kind of wrote this before, but like directions, I always get lost. I'm writing, hopefully you're writing too. Maybe on a Jot, Google Doc, maybe you're adding on to your warm-up from today. I'm also going to start to reflect on these things. Like I said before, that the moment I had with the dictionary and the SATs, these were moments where I realized like how powerful, like that reading could improve my life, get me places. Here's another way you could go about this, and this is probably my favorite way. Remember on the first day of school, we thought about identity work? I'm going to go back to that page. You might want to right now open up your identity map. Or if you don't have it nearby, just remember what you put on it. I'm going to go through it and just kind of like run my finger along it and just think, does any of this affect my reading life? Ireland. Okay. I'm just putting my finger on a place that's important, something that made it onto my identity map. I'm just realizing that when it comes to Ireland, a place where I spend a lot of time, where my family comes from, where I have a deep connection with, I realize that I have spent so much time reading about Ireland. Sometimes I'm reading stories about Ireland, stories that take place there, because I'm fascinated by the culture. Sometimes I'm reading about places I should visit in Ireland. Sometimes I'm reading directions for places in Ireland I don't know how to find. I'm reading menus in Ireland, recipes to make Irish food. Whoa, I'm realizing that one thing that's really important to me when it comes to reading is seeing and experiencing places. Have you ever traveled somewhere, or has your family ever traveled somewhere? It might not have to be something like Ireland, but maybe just like another part of New York City or the state, maybe another state in the United States. Did you and your family have to read directions, read menus? Did you have to, or did you want to read maybe about the place you were going to learn the best places you should go? I was thinking about how a lot of you wrote for your on-demand writing assessments about amusement parks you love or water parks you've gone to. Did you ever read about water parks or amusement parks before you went or after you went? Watch videos about it? What about, let me see, like what about the hobbies that we have in our lives? I've written some down. Like I like to play sports. I used to play a lot of soccer as a kid, and I've definitely read a lot about soccer. I've read about different players. I've read soccer statistics. I've read explanations for soccer plays. I've read about soccer programs I could have been a part of. So maybe It's important to me because it helps me do things I love. A lot of you have been talking in class about video games you love. Have you ever read something about a video game? Have you ever read directions for a video game? Have you ever read reviews or other people's experiences with a video game? Compared which video game you should buy? So right now, I want you to go back to your list from the do now or make a new one, making it even more meaningful. Do you see how mine gets super, super meaningful to me? I start with the stuff we said before, the everyday things like directions and menus, going down to then my own personal experiences like first grade, the SATs, times where it felt super powerful and important to be able to read. And then also thinking about times where I read a lot. Maybe things I forgot that I spent so much time reading about. So take a second right now to think. Maybe review your identity web. What's important to you as a person is going to affect and influence what's important to you as a reader. So take some time right now to review who you are, what makes you you, and then let that become part of your list. Let me give you a couple minutes to do this. And when you're ready, you might start thinking about the next step, which is now finally to make your reading plan. So today, when you go off, you're going to get to read so many different texts, like a giant amount of text on our Padlet I've been compiling for you. And it's important that today and every day you go off to read, you have a plan for how you're going to spend your time so that you make sure it's meaningful. In 6th grade, we're going to read a lot. And in life, hopefully, you're going to read a lot. You want to make sure that when you read, it's meaningful and powerful, and that it's going to help you to get stronger as a reader. How do you do that? You make sure that you know why you're reading, and you use what's important to you. So I'm going to start to make my reading plan for life and today. Okay, so I'm thinking about the lists I was making before, like times I've read, times where reading's been important, times when reading's been a big part of my life. And I'm going to start to think about our first unit, which is going to be a fiction unit. I'm going to start with this for now. If we're going to go into a unit that's for fiction, and I'm going to go on a Padlet in a few minutes, where I get to just look at a ton of different texts and make some decisions about what I want to read and what kinds of books I want to read in the upcoming unit, I should have a plan for myself that I can hold to make sure that reading helps me to get stronger and feels meaningful and powerful. So maybe it's that I want to read, let me think back about what I said about Ireland, what I said before about sports I played, like how could I use that? Maybe I could say something, I want to read about places that are important to me. Like Ireland for me, but maybe there's other places like Brooklyn where I also live, or Boston where my family lives. That makes me think that maybe I want to read books and stories about cultures that are like mine. I also love reading books. For instance, let me just grab it really fast. I also love reading books about cultures that are different from mine. Remember the first day at school when we read The Proud is Blue? I want to read about this culture. I want to understand Fiza and Asaya's life. I want to read about cultures that are different than mine. I might even reference the book to remember, like I want to read about Fiza from The Proud is Blue. Maybe I've never even read anything about Islam before, what it means to be a Muslim woman or girl. I'm gonna make a note of that. I also could think about my hobbies. Maybe I want to read about sports, or I want to read about girl characters that are sporty like me. So now I have, check this out, I have now some information that I can hold myself to about maybe, for instance, like places, settings I care about, maybe topics and cultures, types of characters. Whoa, sounds a little bit like fiction and what we know to be true about all fiction stories, right? What else? Maybe I go back to my identity web and think about maybe things I care about. Oh, right, remember I told you about how I'm an activist for anti-racism? Maybe when I read books like this that talk about what it means to be a person of color in this country, to be a Black person in this country, because I want to know more about it as an activist and as a person working to be anti-racist. So maybe I want to read fiction stories that deal with racism, so that I can understand how I can be better. Maybe I'm excited about being in middle school. So I want to read books like Those Shoes. I want to read books like Brave and Awkward, because those books are about middle school issues and problems. So maybe I want to read about middle school stuff like fitting in, being popular, wearing the right kinds of shoes and clothes. Maybe I want to read about crushes and boys or girls or dating. I don't know. I could write that down, because there's a lot of books out there that are maybe at my level now that I can read that have to do with those things. So here's what I want you to do. I want you right now to make your official reading plan, not just for today, but for every day that you set out to read. You want to keep in mind that we're going into a fiction unit, and today you're going to be reading fiction texts and stories. So while this will affect your whole life, you might want to keep it in mind that you should be thinking about maybe the kinds of stories, because you can still learn about cultures, places, histories, religions. You can learn about social issues through stories. That's the beauty of it. So will you right now make your reading plan? You can make it on a piece of paper, or you can make it in a Google Doc. Whatever you end up doing, I would like you to send it to me in Google Classroom. You could take a picture of it and upload it to the classwork. You can also just write it right there in the classwork. I want to see what you were thinking about today. In fact, I want to see a lot of your notes, so you can go back to even the beginning of your notes. I want to see what you're thinking, and I want to see especially what your plan is for reading today and every day you read fiction stories. I cannot wait to see what you do. And remember to watch the next video to see how you'll do it on the Padlet. I can't wait. Yay! I'll see you soon, readers.